Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Wormsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there and welcome to the WP Builds podcast once again. You're on episode number 235 entitled Use Newsletter Glue to Create Great Emails with Blocks. It was published on Thursday the 24th of June 2021. My name's Nathan Wrigley, and as always, a very short bit of housekeeping before we begin. If you like what WP Builds produces, the best place to find all of our content is over on our website. That is wpbuilds.com. You'll find a menu at the top of that page, and one of the best ones is wpbuilds.com/subscribe, because if you go to that page, you'll be able to keep in touch with all that we produce each and every week. So there's newsletter lists, there's links to our YouTube channel, Twitter feed, and so on. You can find it all there, and I would highly recommend that you subscribe to our newsletter, and that of course is the topic that we're talking about today. Another thing going on at the moment is we're trying to launch our own social network. It's over at wpbuilds.social, that is a URL, wpbuilds.social, and it's a piece of open source software called Mastodon. You can find it and download it for yourself and fiddle about with it, but if you fancy a Twitter-style interaction, but just for the WP Builds community, wpbuilds.social. Go there and sign up. Another thing to mention is wpbuilds.com/deals. It's a bit like Black Friday, but every day of the week you can go there and find coupon codes. In fact, you'll find a 15% coupon code for the Newsletter Glue plugin that we're going to be mentioning in the show today, but it's not the only one. There's absolutely loads over there. So if you're in the market this week for something WordPressy, that might be a plugin or a theme or something else, head over there, use the big yellow button to do some searching and filtering and see if you can get yourself some money off. And the last one, wpbuilds.com/advertise. If you would like to get your product or service in front of a WordPress specific audience, you can do that with WP Builds, a bit like A/B Split Test have done. Do you want to set up your A/B split test in record time? The new A/B split test plugin for WordPress will have you up and running in a couple of minutes. Use your existing pages and test anything against anything else. Buttons, images, headers, rows, anything. And the best part is it works with Beaver Builder, Elementor, and the WordPress block editor. You can check it out and get a free demo at absplittest.com. Okay, so what are we talking about today? This is episode, as I said, number 235, and it's all about a plugin called Newsletter Glue. I am joined by Leslie Sim, who is the co-founder of this plugin, to explain how it all works. The idea really is very simple. If you would like to create newsletters, but you also want to create blog posts or stick to the WordPress block editor, she's come up with 6 little blocks that can enable you to do that. So what I mean by that is, if you create a post, you are simultaneously creating a newsletter. You can turn blocks on so that they appear only in the post, only in the newsletter, or both, so that you can have a sort of mix and match a la carte structure. So there are certain things in the post connected to this podcast that will only be in the newsletter, and certain things which will only be on the podcast post. So it's really ingenious. The 6 little blocks cover just about any scenario that you could possibly want for a newsletter, and you hook it up to your mail sender of choice, something like MailChimp, or in my case, a self-hosted solution called Sendy, and when the news post is published, out goes the newsletter. It's all automated. It's really ingenious, and to me, it really demonstrates why the whole block thing is so incredibly powerful. Who would have thought that you could create posts which would send out newsletters from blocks? Just before we begin the podcast, I would like to say that Leslie has very kindly offered listeners to WP Builds a 15% off coupon code. So if what you listen to today attracts you and you think, yes, I would like to buy that, you can click on the link in the show notes and use the offer code presented there to get yourself 15%. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello there and welcome to the WP Builds podcast once again. This time we've got an interview, and today I'm joined, this is going to be a subject that I'm really close to actually, so I'm really keen to get stuck into this. I'm joined by Leslie Sim. How are you doing, Leslie?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Nathan.
You're very welcome. Am I right in saying that you're based and currently in Singapore?
That's right.
Well, in that case, I'm terribly sorry for keeping you awake. It's probably time to have knocked off and had a glass of wine by now, but nevertheless, here you are. Thank you. We're talking today about a plugin which, like I said at the top of the show, this is something that I'm really interested in. Before we get stuck into it, go to newsletterglue.com. Newsletterglue.com. It's exactly how you would imagine it's spelt. You'll get a full-on impression of what it is, but just in case you're nowhere near a device that you can do that with, Leslie, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just quickly telling us what Newsletter Glue is, what it does, and the normal UVP stuff.
Yeah. So Newsletter Glue is a lightweight newsletter builder inside WordPress. And since this is a WordPress podcast, you'll totally understand when I say it's built on top of the Gutenberg block editor. So we use the Gutenberg block editor experience and let you build a newsletter with a bunch of custom blocks, like a bulk post embed block and subscriber forms and stuff like that. And we connect you to your email service provider or ESP. So that means you don't have to, write your blog post every week or blog posts every week in WordPress and then hop over to MailChimp or Campaign Monitor, whatever it is you're using, and write your weekly update in that email editor. So instead, you can do everything in WordPress, which saves a bunch of time. And you're already familiar with the WordPress experience, so that just feels more comfortable for people as well.
I guess people are going to be curious as to why they would do this. It's obvious to me, and actually I will go into a little bit later some of the reasons I think this is a great idea to do it in Gutenberg. But just wondering from your side of things, we've obviously got a ton of paid services, SaaS apps. The list is endless of email autoresponders, email providers, WYSIWYG, drag and drop editors. They'll do anything. Why did you take the punt on building this as a WordPress plugin when the competition was already so remarkably there's just hundreds and hundreds of incumbents out there already?
I think the way I looked at it was there wasn't a WordPress plugin doing this specific thing. So as you said, there are lots of SaaS apps that try to combine the blog and the newsletter together. But, in my mind, there are millions and millions of people already with established blogs on WordPress. And they're either not sending the newsletter because they can't stand having to, pop over to MailChimp, for example, every week and write their newsletter. So they just don't bother. And just kind of putting everything into WordPress, it's just like a much nicer writing experience. And on top of that, it also means that you get, SEO. You benefit from SEO because your newsletters now are published on the web, so they kind of work the same way that blog posts would work. So they're easily accessible. You have nicer URLs, so you don't rely on your existing email service provider to give you an archive link. You have an archive link that's tied to your actual domain name. You can add subscriber forms into your newsletter on the web that don't show up in your email. You can hide certain information, again, that shows up on your email newsletter that doesn't show up in your archive. A whole bunch of different things that you can do once you've kind of more closely tied your email newsletter to your website.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I was explaining to Leslie before we press record that I've kind of gone through a whole bunch of services and providers, and currently I'm using a SaaS app to send out our newsletter. That's not true. I've got two things going. I've got one which I use to send out posts which I create in WordPress. So that is, for example, assuming I don't move over to Newsletter Glue in the time between this recording and when this episode publishes, I'll have used a third-party app and I'll have basically copied and pasted a bunch of text and had to re-upload the featured image and move things around and then manually organise the date that I want that to go out to match the date and time that the WordPress post goes in. And although that's not an onerous task because I can more or less do it on autopilot now, it is still at least 20 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, something like that. So I have to go and find the appropriate field, copy that across, go and find the image, which is the featured image, but find it on my desktop instead of in WordPress, upload it, make sure it's the right dimensions and so on and so forth. And then on another side, a newsletter that I produce for a show that we do on Monday/Tuesday, that's all taken care of within the SaaS app. They deal with the sending of it and so on. So I've got this system which is really broken because it's in multiple different places. And I've tried so many different things. I've tried WordPress plugins, which were great, but had their own pitfalls. I've tried SaaS only, but that's got the problem because it's decoupled with WordPress. And so this really, really seems like a total shoo-in for me. In fact, I'd be very surprised if at some point very soon I don't, subscribe to your service and get moving on. But I'm curious to know whether it can do things outside of blog posts. So, for example, the way that you described it just then, it sounds like you create let's say a post, just a normal WordPress post, and you wish to publish that on the web, and as a sort of bolt-on added extra, you would like to notify your users via an email. Is that how it works? Are we creating newsletters based upon posts? Does it go out one post equals one email, or can we kind of amass them so that every month it sends out a curated list of them? What is going on exactly?
Well, first off, thanks for saying that you're planning to use my plugin. Can't wait to have you on board, and I'll definitely roll out the red carpet when you do.
That's very kind.
So the way it works right now, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we hope to change that in the future, but the way it works right now is you can do both. So you can either send an existing blog post out as an email. So you write your blog post and then you send that entire thing out to your email subscribers the moment you hit publish. So that's one possibility. Then the other possibility, which is how I think most of our existing customers use it, is they create a separate post. So let's say you've got throughout the week, you've written 3 blog posts, right? And then on the Friday or something, you create a new blog post, so a 4th one. And that one curates the 3 blog posts that you've written, as well as like a personal message for your subscribers. And then you send that out separately. And then you put that in a newsletter category, for example. And so again, like categories work exactly the same way blog posts work, right? Because you're just doing everything in WordPress. And so now you've got this nice, neat newsletter category in your blog, and people can click on it to read your newsletters. And you just use that as a way to separate your blog posts from your newsletters.
Okay, I understand. So we're creating a sort of separate post, and in the days before Gutenberg, that would have been quite a tricky proposition, wouldn't it? But now that we've got these blocks and this block methodology, and in your case, the block takes care of a variety of different ways to style it and so on. That seems like a really nice idea. So do we, when we're in the post that we're using to create, let's take the example of the post where we're creating three articles that we've written during the week. Do we then click on a newsletter glue block, which then gets added to the content? And then do we have options to style it in the menu as we are so growing used to with other blocks?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So my favorite way of doing it is creating reusable blocks and using that to create templates.
Right.
So you add for example, your introduction, a post embed block, and your footer into a reusable block. And so when you add a new post, you add your reusable block, and there's your newsletter template. And in the post embed block, that's kind of like it's like you can bulk add posts to your newsletter. So you copy and paste let's say 5 different links, and it immediately shows up in a nice table with the featured image, the header, the description all pulled in, and you can make some formatting changes, and then you're done.
Okay. The bit that you just described is actually a real time saver, and you said it as if it was nothing. But for me, that would be a really big deal because each time you're pulling in the featured image and so on, that's actually saving quite a lot of clicks. Does that only apply to blog posts that are created upon my own website, or can I, for example, in a curated newsletter where, and in my case, I'm creating newsletters based upon content which other people are creating on other WordPress properties like WP Tavern and all these other blogs. Can I paste in a link from them and you'll go and scrape the featured image, or, as I say, is it just able to do that kind of thing for things that are already on my website?
So you can do both. Good news.
Nice.
So both internal links and external ones as well.
Okay. And what are the sort of styling options? So in a typical newsletter that I send, most of it is just text with links. So I will highlight the article's name, the title of that particular post, and then I'll offer a little brief description. If there's a featured image that I manually create, because I have to do all that manually currently, then that becomes a link as well. But basically that's it. And I don't have, with the platform that I'm using at the minute, I don't have really too many options. I can't float the image left, I can't float the image right, I can't make it into a square or a rectangle. Presumably you have those kind of options, change the font, change the weight and so on, and change the dimensions of the images and so forth.
So we've kept it relatively simple, but flexible as well, based on what, at least I think, as a self-professed newsletter nerd, what I think newsletter writers would want. And so in our case, you can have like 100% block. So that would mean the image is the full width, the text is the full width, and then you also have 50-50. So text and image are 50-50, or 30-70 or 70-30. And then you can move the image left and right as well.
Okay. This is great. I'm really excited about this. I'm one of the big constraints upon writing email is the legacy mess that we're left with, because certain email clients can do this and that and the other thing, and many people are on outdated email clients that can't do half of what they need to do, and so on. And so email sending to be to look good everywhere, shall we say, is fraught with difficulties. Now, I'm presuming that because we're keeping this fairly simple and it's images, texts and links, and that's more or less it, you've got some sort of guarantee of the deliverability and the readability and so on with what you're creating?
Yep. So the nice thing about the way we've set things up, deliverability is handled by the email service provider. So whether that's MailChimp, MailerLite, I think we are connected to 6 or 7 ESPs now. So those guys, whose sole and main job it is to take care of deliverability at a massive scale, we rely on them to do that bit. And then in terms of formatting, that's honestly like a constant struggle. Mm-hmm. So we do use Litmus and Email and Acid and stuff like that to test, to make sure that the email formatting is okay. But even then, with the slightest and smallest things that you want to do, you have to make sure it works across hundreds of different email clients, and not every email client will display things the exact same way.
I know.
And that's just something you just kind of have to live with.
Well, also, curiously, the more complicated you want your design to be, the more difficult it is to achieve that across the board. Whereas what you're doing and what I do with my newsletter, it really is, background colors, text and images and links. That's about it. There's nothing more complicated. So I feel that you're in a fairly safe area. If anything's going to work, it's a plain text with a few images newsletter. So that's quite good. You mentioned that you're using these third-party sending services, and you said that there were 6 of them. I'm just wondering, because this is bound to be the point of either jumping on board or saying, well, I can't use that. It just simply doesn't work with the thing that I need it to work with. Do you have a list of those 6 currently?
Yeah, so it's MailChimp. Let me just pull it out so I don't miss anyone. MailChimp, MailerLite, Sendinblue, Campaign Monitor, ActiveCampaign, GetResponse, and Sendy.
Okay. I'm sure that probably covers most people's needs, and we'll get onto the roadmap in a moment. But I'm curious as to how that works, because, in the case of things like MailChimp, it's very much they would love for you to build all that stuff over there, use their WYSIWYG editor, use their drag and drop editor. Are you literally sending the email over to them and they will instantly send it for you? Because I've never really been involved in that side of things. I've always pressed the go button. Is that how it works? When the article is published on WordPress, it gets pushed to, let's use the example of MailChimp, why not? Gets pushed to MailChimp, and then it will instantly send over there? Or does it go into like some sort of draft status that you need to then just check? Or how does all that actually work in the case of MailChimp?
So we actually make use of their APIs. Mm-hmm. So with all of these email service providers, we use their APIs to send the emails or send test emails and stuff like that. So you don't have to go into the MailChimp editor, for example, and send it once. Like, it's not a matter of like we import it into MailChimp and then you have to go into MailChimp to press send. Mm-hmm. You can send it straight away from WordPress. Okay,
right. So basically you click go and it goes to MailChimp. MailChimp are just handling the sending of it and therefore handling all the subscribe and unsubscribe problems that you may have. Yeah, that's nice. You mentioned one in there that is curious to me. Apologies, listeners, if this is no interest to you. You may be switched off for the next minute or two. But I have an install of a third party. Well, no, it's not a third party. It's a self-hosted piece of software. It's a PHP script called Sendy. And I was curious because in the time that we arranged to have this interview and now, that got added. And so that's a really nice way of doing this on your own hardware, if you like. If you've got a DigitalOcean droplet lying around doing nothing, you could quickly, for I think it's $59 or something, get yourself a copy of Sendy, configure it with Amazon SES, and the cost of that is just ridiculously low. So I'm really delighted that you've added that in.
Yeah, I'm excited about that as well. I think it pairs well because, Sendy is like a super easy way to manage your subscribers and all that. But as you alluded to, its editor is also quite pared down. And so partnering up with us, that, lets us take care of a part that Sendy's not so good at, and lets us use Sendy for the part that we're not so good at. So I think it works well.
That really almost is the moment at which I'm going to jump over, really, because I've got that sitting there. I love Sendy, but for anything other than plain text, well, unless you're prepared to literally write in tables, then doing anything more complicated in Sendy is a bit of a trial. You have to do it and then import it and make sure that everything's aligned and so on. Plus, they've got this quirky unsubscribe link, which I notice you've taken care of as part of your UI, which is really nice to see as well. You'd have to go back in and edit all that. The one of the things that I'm curious about is whether you've got deeper integrations within WordPress. So as an example, is it possible to send based upon certain conditions? So for example, in my case, I might have a category of, well, let's say newsletter for the want of anything else, and I might have various other categories, but only stuff under the umbrella of the newsletter category ought to go out. I'm just wondering if you have conditions that can be set up, delays so that it sends at certain times of the day, any other sort of automated stuff that's going on in the background.
We don't have anything particularly clever right now, but what we have done is worked out quite well with the schedule button within the post editor.
Right.
So if you schedule a post, then you can schedule a newsletter as well, and you can unschedule it if you like, if you have regrets. But yeah, that's about it.
Okay. So we've on the top of the website, we've got three things in the main menu. The first one of which is Newsletter Glue features, and I just want to sort of talk through all of these because we haven't really talked about the way things look and the bits and pieces that will actually be included in the email. So the first one of the 7, I think it is, that you describe, one of which I think is a roadmap feature, is the author byline, which might not sound like a great deal, but it is quite a nice thing to include. Tell us what that one is, and then we'll just go through them very quickly, one at a time.
Cool. Okay. So the author byline is, it's as you mentioned, it's something that you see at the top of many blog posts. So, in your case, it might say Nathan Wrigley, founder of WP Builds, and then we add a follow link as well, so people can click on it to, for example, go to your website or go to Twitter, and follow you over there. It's just kind of a nice way to put a face to the newsletter.
Yeah, it's nice, and you just see this all over the place in blogs. It typically lives at the bottom, doesn't it? But it's quite nice to surface it in an email. And again, because that's a block, and you could make it into a reusable. Well, you should make it into a reusable block. You can just click one button, and there it will be in every single email. Speaking of which, I'm just going to segue for a moment and move away from your features. Is it possible to create? I know that you could do this inside of Gutenberg, but do you have like a templating facility where you could just sort of drag in a Newsletter Glue pre-created template, or would we need to do that through the mechanism of the block editor and save a whole load of reusable blocks?
We're hoping to create templates in the future, but that's huge. That's going to take months. So for now, we just have the reusable blocks method, which I think works really well.
Actually, yeah. I mean, I have reusable blocks for more or less all the content that I repeat over and over again on WordPress. So blog posts have a reusable block, and news items have a reusable block, and then I just convert them into regular blocks just before I edit them, so that it's not saving as a sort of, it's not saving and rewriting, and that would completely function, which is another example of why I think this is so perfect inside of Gutenberg, because all of that stuff's kind of built in already. Okay, right, moving on. We're back to the list of 7 different things. The next one is a call-out card, which we're probably familiar with on the web, but maybe not in emails. What's that one?
So call-out cards just gives you an easy way to format a block, essentially. So let's say that you were writing a post, and then a couple of paragraphs in, you want to add a definition or add a side note or something, then using a call-out card is the perfect way to do that. I also know a bunch of users use call-out cards for sponsored posts.
Yes.
So if you want to, so create like a background and maybe your sponsors colors or something like that. You can add that to the call-out card, and it just makes everything look a bit nicer.
Yeah, so it essentially it's just making something slightly different from the rest of it in the UI, so that when you're reading through the email, something kind of stands out to attention. It doesn't have to be screaming at you with a bright red neon background or anything, but a subtle thing. Do you have the option? I'm just going to, again, sorry, I'm going to segue because there's so many thoughts coming into my head. Is it possible, for example, to inject, let's say, for example, I've got another plugin which is taking care of pushing via shortcodes things into posts. That may be an advert, but it may be, something that displays within the post. How would that be handled? Let's take the example of if I've got an advert which is done by a different plugin, and it's got a shortcode which surfaces a link which is inside of an image in a blog post. Could Newsletter Glue consume that and send it out in the email, or is it only would it exclude things that are created by shortcodes?
I really have to see how the whole thing was done, so it's a bit hard for me to know this way. Off the top of my head, it's likely that the HTML will be pulled in, but the styling won't be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's just what I would expect to have happen.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Anyway, so there's the call out card. Next up, we've got metadata, which I guess most people know what that is, but maybe not in the context of an email. So what's the metadata?
The metadata is my second favorite feature. The post embeds block, which we've been talking about, is my first. So the metadata block gives you in seconds. Let me see if I get this right. The post author's profile picture and name, date, publishing date, gives you the option to add a location to your newsletter as well, and reading time, and finally a read online link. So all of that is auto-generated, and so if you are reading the newsletter on your email client, let's say Gmail, you can click on the read online link, and that would take you straight to the blog, which is kind of nice and gives people a way to head back to your blog.
Yeah, it's a nice feature added in as well, because in my case, it's basically just me. So if anybody receives my newsletter, you just know it's me that's written all that stuff. So it's of no consequence. But it's a team of writers, and maybe you have one person on that team who you've just discovered over time is your favourite author, and you rather see their stuff. So it's quite nice to be able to sort of say, oh, that particular article, that was done by Leslie. Great. I'm going to open that one. So it's the usual WordPress metadata, but surfaced in an email for convenience. Does that attach itself then? How do we switch that on and off? Let's say I've brought in a post that was previously written on my WordPress website. Do we have to drag that in and then write all of those boxes in, or can we just toggle a box on a newsletter piece, one of the blocks, and it will then create the metadata block for us? How does it work?
So if, for example, you open an existing blog post and you add the metadata block into it, it will generate the data based on that blog post, including the author of that blog post.
Okay, so that's the easiest way that you can imagine to do it. That's lovely. People are going to want to know about this one, subscribers. So obviously there's a subscribe form which comes along with this. It looks fairly nice and straightforward. It's not asking for anything unnecessary. In the setup that you've got shown on your website, it only asks for the email field. How configurable is that? And where's it linking to? So, for example, in the case where I'm using Sendy, how is the subscriber information from that form getting to Sendy, or maybe it's not? And am I able to configure that box to add in additional things like, for example, I'd like your name, not just your email address as well?
So the good news with that is we actually connect you to your email service provider right at the start during the onboarding. And from that moment on, all the forms work like magic. So you never ever have to connect the form every single time, which is always a pain. So it's as simple as adding a block to your post. So that's the first thing. Mm-hmm. And then with regards to formatting, so we actually have a bunch of different things that you can add to the form. We have headings, paragraphs, a name, a checklist, which I understand is really important for GDPR. Mm-hmm, I think the day after we launched the form, someone was like, I can't use this unless you have a checkbox.
Right, yes.
So we added that in quickly. And the checkbox allows you also to segment. So, for example, with the form, you get segmented to one list, and then if you add the checkbox, you can add like a separate list or something like that. And then there's also text beneath the form. So, that sometimes you see in forms where they say no spam, or they have that little message. Yeah, so we've got that option for you to add as well. And finally, you can customize the confirmation text as well.
Okay, so I think the biggest takeaway from me there is that there's a nice hardwired integration between the sender, in my case Sendy or MailChimp or whatever it may be, and if somebody subscribes to that list, then you literally shoot the email across over to them, and they take care of the double opt-in side of things and all of that, and confirm that they are a legitimate thing. And then I'm guessing that on the flip side of this, you've also, is it possible to unsubscribe? Obviously, I'm imagining there's an unsubscribe link inside the email itself, because that's the rules. But is there a place that you can be sent to on the WordPress website where they can unsubscribe if they, I don't know, type in an email address or anything like that?
No. Nothing so fancy, unfortunately.
Okay. And one last thing on the forms: is it possible to add additional fields? So we've got the email address, which is frankly all that we need, but sometimes we like to have a bit more, don't we? Name and so on.
Not right now. So we have the name. So it's name and email right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Right, moving on. We've got 3 more to go. We've got social embeds. I've never been into putting social stuff in my newsletter, so this one is fairly new to me. What's this one?
Okay, I'm gonna have to pull up my own website right now to see how I've talked about it, because we've actually changed it quite a bit from the original plan.
That's always a good sign, though, when the development is moving at such a pace that you can't actually remember what the feature looks like on the website only a few weeks ago. That's great.
Okay, yeah, good. So I've updated it on the site as well.
Well done.
Yeah, so with the social embeds, originally it was going to be like you have to add a block, and then inside the block you add your Twitter link or something like that. And then we realized, that's not how Gutenberg handles social embeds natively, and so that might not be obvious to people. So now we just kind of work off of the way people already do it with Gutenberg. So that means you could just add a link, a Twitter link, for example, directly into the block editor, and then that gets formatted in the newsletter. So it's actually kind of like an invisible feature. You don't really see it happening, but we just take care of all the stuff behind the scenes, and you get a nice Twitter card or YouTube card and so on.
Okay, and that happens for Twitter and YouTube, I understand, but maybe there's some other services on the roadmap. I don't know. But okay, that's nice. And I think we mentioned this one. The final one, which is extant at the moment, is post embeds. You actually mentioned this as part of the stuff toward the beginning. But anyway, we'll go through this. It's sort of like a card view of posts. So yeah, over to you. Post embeds.
So that, as you mentioned, is a card view of posts. You add links into the block, and we auto-generate the featured image, the header, and the description of the post for you. And all of that is editable. So you can go in and change the, for example, if you felt that the original blog post didn't have a catchy enough title and you wanted to change it, you can go in and just do that.
Yeah.
And then you can change, like, for example, the background of each card, if you have branding and stuff like that.
Yep.
Yep. So yeah.
Looks really nice. I should say this is all over at newsletterglue.com/features. And the last one, which is I'm imagining a roadmap item, is labelled as coming soon at the moment. Perhaps by the time this episode airs, one will be on the website already, and maybe there'll be another one. The 8th coming soon item. This is table. What are you planning around tables? Because that's a feature I can well imagine using, actually, but it doesn't exist in the setup I've got at the moment.
So tables is something that we wish that we didn't have to build, but because email clients are stuck in a different time than web browsers,
indeed,
we have to deal with tables. So basically, tables is the same thing as columns in a web browser. It's just that we kind of have to format it in a simpler way.
Yeah.
So that it's readable in your email. So that's just kind of the unfortunate way we have to go about it.
Yeah, so in the case of creating a 2-column layout, it would be done with tables. Is that how you're sort of describing it? And then presumably if you wanted to, I don't know, make the table not appear in the email, you would then have to color it the same as the background. But the intention is to be able to have multi-column layouts, but done through the, let's say, the archaic method of tables.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Oh dear. Yeah, I can well imagine. But there's lots of situations where I have in the past created content that literally is just a few words. It's a link to I don't know, it might be a WordPress deal, and the title is literally 30% off WP Rocket or something. And if I've got 12 or 13 of those in an email, it uses up so much vertical space. Whereas if I could put them in a 3-column layout side by side, it would consume a third of the space and be equally accessible. So there are situations where I think this would be totally useful. So I'm glad that you're putting that in. In terms of other roadmap features, is there anything else that you do have planned aside from tables in the near future? Because it being a new plugin, I guess you're trying to iterate on it fairly quickly, and you may have some grand ideas.
Yeah, we've got features coming out of our eyeballs actually. I wish I could multiply myself so that we could build faster. Myself and my co-founder. Yeah, so as I kind of alluded to earlier on, we're planning to build templates, and more importantly, we're planning to build a custom post type. So currently you have to. Yeah. So currently you have to write your newsletters like you would a blog post. But with the custom post type, we will be able to, it will actually be very much the same editing experience. It's just that we'll be able to have a little bit more control. So right now, for example, if someone has a bunch of stackable or generate blocks, like they've got a bunch of special blocks.
Yep.
And they add that into the newsletter thinking it'll all magically work. It won't. Everything breaks.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, just because, it's not...
It's not email compatible HTML,
exactly.
I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yeah, and so people don't necessarily understand that. And so having our own custom post type just helps us, prevent those plugins, for example, from loading in our custom post type and making sure everything is formatted the way we want to format
so
it.
It's built as a way of preventing things from going wrong. Yeah, I get it. Before you carry on with the roadmap stuff, if there is any, with that, could I create a custom post type of my own? Just, I don't know, call it newsletter glue or something, and use that, so long as I didn't try to fancy it up with Stackable and Queebly and, generate blocks. Would it be all right to, or do we at the minute have to use the WordPress post type?
No, so you can use you can create your own custom post type.
Okay.
And I actually saw someone on Twitter mention that he'd done that.
Yeah.
So I was quite excited to see what he'd done.
I think that's what I'd do, just to leave it less cluttered. But also, it gets its own gets its way out of the regular archive and things like that, which might be quite a useful thing. And yeah. Okay, sorry. Anyway, so templates is on the roadmap. Anything else?
More integrations always. So
nice.
We kind of try to batch them together and go through a whole cycle where we add a bunch. So more integrations, custom post type, templates. We also want to slowly move into content restriction, and haven't figured how we'll implement it yet, but doing some sort of paid thing will be really nice.
Like a paid newsletter, paid blocks.
Yeah. Paid newsletter.
So not... Okay, let me just get my head around this. So the entire newsletter is paid, not just visibility of certain bits of the newsletter, so certain blocks within that newsletter wouldn't get published. No, that's ridiculous. That would be far too hard to do. Ignore me. Carry on.
Actually, no. So we that would be ideal. So we do so we're working on the content restriction first, and then on top of that, we figure out how to gate certain bits and things like that. But on the subject of hiding things from the email newsletter and so forth, that's actually one of the key features of Newsletter Glue, that you are able to show and hide different parts. So you can show something in the blog post that's hidden from the email newsletter, or vice versa. And that's like a really cool and easy way to add more in, like kind of bring your website and your newsletter closer together while still keeping things separate.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. So you could have additional features over on the website as a sort of, I don't know, as a way of bringing people to your actual domain, which you might allude to in the newsletter, and it would be there ready on the post, the Newsletter Glue post, but it wouldn't be visible in the... Yeah, that's ingenious. That's quite a nifty idea. I like that. Yeah, okay,
Thanks.
good. Yeah. Anything else? This is great.
So just on the subject of the show height thingy, one of the ways that I like doing it would be, for example, on the web version of your newsletter, you have a subscriber form.
Right.
And so, if someone forwarded the link to the newsletter issue to a friend, and that friend reads that newsletter, they have a subscriber form inside the newsletter itself, and that lets them subscribe. So that's one way that I would show content in the web that's hidden from the newsletter, because you obviously can't have a form in the newsletter because email clients don't let that happen.
No.
And it's weird for subscribers to receive that anyway. And then on the flip side, what I would do is, for example, because you want people to also subscribe to your newsletter, people who visit your site. So you might have like a special deal or something that's only available to newsletter subscribers. And so you would show that in your newsletter, and hide that from your blog.
Yeah, that's great. What a nifty idea. Yeah, my head is spinning with different options there. There's so many things that... Well, in my case, there's probably not a lot of hiding to be done, just because of the nature of the fact that I send out an email and I really do want you to get all of it. But I can imagine for people who are into marketing and, using a particular aspect of an email as a funnel to make something else happen, but back on the website, like you say, these kind of things, find out more, click on this, go to the post, see the subscribe form, or whatever it might be. The fact that you can turn things off. So you could literally write entire articles and just hide certain bits of them. Yeah, that's fascinating. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, anything else?
That's about all I can reveal at the moment.
Oh, that's fine.
Saying stuff, yes, because I don't want to say things and then not
deliver.
Yeah.
That's fine. So I'm going to put in one request, which I've already spoken to you before we record, but I don't know if this is of interest, because when I say that, I mean of interest to some of the people listening. The service that I use at the moment comes with a Chrome extension, which allows me to peruse the web. And in my case, I'm just wandering about looking for WordPress related content, and I can click a button in Chrome, and it makes a post out of that in our newsletter in a sort of draft state. Unless I command it to go into the newsletter, it doesn't. It floats there sort of lurking as a draft, and then I log into the SaaS platform and make it live in the next newsletter. And so that's just a really frictionless way of creating curated news. And although I know that the method that you've got, well, actually tell us about whether or not A, you're planning to do anything like that, but B, you've got a nice workaround for people who want to curate newsletters.
So conveniently, the way that I currently do it is also the way I plan to add this feature into our plugin. So the way I personally do it for my own newsletter is that I have a Chrome extension for Notion. Mm-hmm. So Notion's like I don't know what you would call it, a to-do list writer documentation app that's quite popular these days. And so if I see a link that I like, I'll use the Chrome extension to copy, to save it into Notion. And then when it's time to write my newsletter, I just open up my Notion, check through the links, see which ones I like, and paste the links into WordPress. So that's how I've done it right now. And the way I envision at least the feature working in the future in our plugin would be to connect a bunch of similar bookmark apps. So like Notion, Evernote, Bear, I think is another one.
Yeah, Pocket seems to be popular as well. Yeah.
Pocket, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So you connect that directly into the plugin, and so you have like a drop down of all your links from Notion or from Pocket, and then you can just click and it'll be added straight onto your post.
Yeah, I'm a big user. In the previous iteration, without this SaaS service with the Chrome extension, I was recording everything in Evernote and giving it I can't remember what they call it. Is it a tag? That's it. Evernote uses tags, and so I would give it a tag of newsletter, and then I would go in at just before publishing it, and then go and copy and paste those links across, and so that would be a really similar experience to me. It would just mean that I'm doing it all in one go as opposed to sort of doing them one at a time. But yeah, that's really nice. That's really, really nice. So good grief, we've used up so much of your time. I'm sorry. The next important thing, I suppose, is to ask about how much this actually costs. You know, if you've got just the one price or there's several prices. You are, of course, going to find this on the pricing page, which is newsletterglue.com/pricing. But do you want to tell us at the time of recording what your different plans are?
Yeah. So right now, our cheapest plan is $57 a year for a single site license. And then it moves up to $99 for 5 sites and $279 for 25 sites.
Okay, so we've got writer at $57 US, I'm guessing, publisher $99, and agency at $279. It feels like a really nice option to, if you're an agency owner or you're a freelancer and you're building WordPress websites for clients. This feels like a really nice sweet spot kind of plugin that you can throw at them and say, look, you can now do your own newsletters. And so having something like the agency site, you could well imagine that you charge them a monthly retainer for this kind of service, and Newsletter Glue would take care of the actuality of it, and you could offer it and make some additional revenue from it.
Yeah, I think we have a bunch of agencies using it for this exact reason.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that they like about it as well is then they only have to teach their clients about WordPress and not have to also teach them about MailerLite or MailChimp or whatever other thing as well.
Yeah, that's the nice thing I think about it, is that Gutenberg takes care of the lifting of the positioning things in the correct place and so on, and the deliverability is taken care of by, well, in my case, Sendy, which I've never come across a service that actually built the email for Sendy to then send. So I think you've done a really nice job. And I know that quite a few of the people that listen to this have dabbled with Sendy and various other things. So we'll have to see how that works. So Leslie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. One last time, newsletterglue.com. And just before we go, is there any social network that you hang out on or email address that you feel comfortable giving out so that people can contact you if they've listened to this and want to know more?
So they can contact me on either on Twitter DMs. It's at newsletterglue. So same, just the 2 words together, nothing in between, newsletterglue. Or they can email me at leslie@newsletterglue.com. Or they can find me on Twitter as well, Leslie_pizza. And I'm Leslie Pizza elsewhere on the web as well. So if they Google that, they'll find me.
Oh, that's very nice. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about Newsletter Glue. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nathan. It's been great being on.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that episode. I obviously do make use of this plugin. I hope that you can see the benefits of it if you are sending out newsletters, maybe for yourself or perhaps for somebody else, your clients and so on. This is a really solid solution, and it enables you to do all of the heavy lifting inside of one interface. The interface for posts is the same as the interface for newsletters, so it's really ingenious. Just a quick reminder, Leslie was very kind. She gave us 15% off for WP Builds listeners. And if you head over to the post, you'll be able to see in the show notes, search for episode number 235, and you'll be able to find a coupon code over there. So click on the link in the show notes and use the coupon code mentioned there. The WP Builds podcast was brought to you today by AB Split Test. Do you want to set up your AB Split Tests in record time? The new AB Split Test plugin for WordPress will have you up and running in a couple of minutes. Use your existing pages and test anything against anything else. Buttons, images, headers, rows, anything. And the best part is it works with Elementor, Beaver Builder, and the WordPress block editor. You can check it out and get a free demo at absplittest.com. We will be back next week. Thursday will be a podcast episode, as this has been an interview. I'll be chatting with David Wormsley on the A to Z of WordPress. And then every Monday, 2 p.m. UK time, head over to wpbuilds.com/live. And we do the This Week in WordPress show with my good friend Paul Lacey. We'll have some notable WordPress guests on. So there's lots coming up this week. You take care, stay safe. Bye-bye for now.